It was a perfect day, with sunshine bathing the rooftops and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. It was also the day that young Damien nearly ended the world. His mother was busy flipping pancakes, her movements as graceful as a dancer. A towering stack soon emerged, golden syrup glistening on top. Damien, a bright-eyed 13-year-old, was our protagonist. That day, he seemed ordinary enough, sitting and eating nicely with his mother across the table. He devoured his pancakes as always, knowing his mother would notice if he didn't. Between bites, he asked, "Mom, when do I get to summon my companion?" His mother sighed. "Honey, we have this conversation every day. In 4 years, when you turn 17, finish your pancakes." The plate was soon empty. "Why cannot I just summon it now?" he persisted. His mother, Hilla Vale, a woman with long scars on her chin, replied sternly, "Because you could die. It is not safe." Damien countered, "I could still die when I am 17 too. Then you will die more mature," Hilla said calmly. She began clearing the dishes. "And do not even think bringing up your father. Look where it got him." Damien replied without hesitation, "A good job." Mother sighed and replied while continuing cleaning the dishes, "He has not been home in months because the queen has him running around the front lines." Meanwhile, Damien sat still at the table. Trying to soothe Damien, she softened her tone as well as ruffled his hair. "You will get your companion soon enough. Good things come to those who wait." Yet, the 13-year-old's clear eyes held a mischievous glint and a hint of calculation. It seemed her words fell on deaf ears. As soon as Damien finished his chores, his mother told him, "I have got a meeting with Mayor Leo. I expect your homework to be done when I get back." Damien quickly assured her, "I will start it now," putting her mind at ease. Before she left, not forgetting to say goodbye to him, "I am sure you will. There is food in the icebox if you need it. See you soon." The moment the door closed behind her, Damien rushed to listen at the door to make sure she was really gone. Once he was certain, he grinned mischievously, thinking, "It is now or never. I should have a few hours before Mom gets home." He quickly ran to an old, dusty cupboard, staring at the cupboard and trying to get all his bravery together for this time. He whispered an incantation very carefully again and again. However, the door remained stubbornly shut. Damien was looking at the cupboard and wondering why. Then he decided to step back, far away from the cupboard. This time, instead of whispering, he shouted the spell at the top of his lungs. The spell immediately casted a golden light on the cupboard. To his surprise, the cupboard's doors actually opened. He snorted with a self-satisfied chuckle. "I knew I memorized the keywords right." A soft, golden light enveloped him and the cupboard as he stepped inside. It was a massive cupboard, filled with shelves laden with boxes of all sizes and books. He quickly found what he was looking for. A thick, brown book adorned with intricate designs. The title read, "The Summoner's Almanac." Clutching the book to his chest with an unknown excitement. Then he closed the cupboard door. Damien admired the book and exclaimed, "This is it. I knew Mom kept it here." This was a very old and dusty storage room, where there were plenty of spider webs around. Damien entered the old storage room, the book still in his hand. The door creaked open, a sound that spoke of years of neglect. The room was so dusty that he sneezed loudly and coughed. But that didn't stop him from doing something crazy. With unwavering determination, he dropped the book to the floor and began to read intently. Pages were turned rapidly, revealing countless spells and their corresponding rituals. Soon, his eyes fixed on a particular page. It was covered in intricate symbols and a diagram of overlapping circles and a triangle. He exclaimed, 7 planes. This is it, the summoning ritual. Sitting and then lying down, he carefully studied the instructions, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Got it, he muttered. I can do this. With his naturally intelligent but impulsive nature, Damien ignored his mother's warnings and began performing the ritual described in the book. He meticulously drew the magic circle on the floor, using chalk to create intricate designs. He even lay down on the floor to ensure he drew the lines perfectly. When he was finished, Damien propped himself up on his hands, his face slightly weary from the meticulous task. A hint of doubt crossed his mind. Then, he thought, better to be safe. I will add a barrier just in case. He added a protective circle around the magic circle. With a final flourish, he dropped the remaining piece of chalk on the floor. Damien sat proudly at the center of his completed magic circle. Finally, I have got to get this finished before Mom gets home. Without hesitation, he began to chant the spell from the book. Earnestly reach out with your heart and mind. Your call will echo throughout the planes of existence, and your companion shall respond. Instantly, the magic circle erupted in brilliant light as he knelt in its center. Focusing all his energy on the spell, beautiful, iridescent lights danced and twirled, more mesmerizing than anything Damien had ever seen. He had longed for this moment. His spell shot out the bright light across the other world and all over the places. A magnificent golden tower appeared, ancient and otherworldly. At its base, a river of red-hot lava flowed furiously. More than anything else in the world, Damien Vale wanted to cast magic, and there was only one Watt to do that. To summon a companion. The golden light spread, penetrating every corner of the room and even reaching the depths of the earth. Damien's impassioned call hurtled through the 7 planes, passing countless souls by, into the deepest place on earth. It went to where to living mortals thought had ever been before. It kept going, and going. It fell through the cracks in the universe and slipped into the void. And from the far reaches of the cosmos, a place of eerie purple light began to grow. Damien was terrified. The golden light had been replaced by a sinister purple. Surrounded by twisted, charred branches, purple lightning crackled around the magic circle, distorting the symbols he had drawn. Damien's eyes widened in shock. He was horrified by the result of his spell. The void answered. The wind howled, carrying with it an eerie, purplish-black aura that swirled before Damien. A bone-chilling cold seeped into him, but he tried to remain calm. It is okay, he thought. The ritual only connects me to the companion. Nothing is strong enough to do anything until we bond. Suddenly, a piercing shriek echoed through the air, and a swirling portal of dark purple opened before him. It grew larger and larger, until it seemed to envelop his entire being. Damien's heart pounded. Blood seeped from his eyes and mouth as his eyes rolled back into his head and his skin turned ashen. Damien died. His body began to slump, releasing waves of golden light that shot upward. The strange light continued to emanate from his chest, forming a shimmering orb around him before slowly shattering. With a final bruck, the light vanished completely, leaving Damien's lifeless body behind. His eyes were vacant, his lips pale, but the light was not entirely gone. A wisp of purplish-black smoke enveloped the remaining energy, forming a small sphere. Gently, it drifted back towards Damien's cooling body. Damien's eyes flickered open, his lips moved, and color returned to his face. Gasping for breath, he sat up, drenched in sweat. Oops, the purplish-black smoke exclaimed. Hovering nearby, Damien clutched his head, his face contorted in confusion. What was that? My mind is so fuzzy. What happened? A voice, clear and distinct, answered the question swirling in his mind. Your soul attempted to flee. I retrieved it for you. Startled, Damien asked, what? Before him stood a creature of unimaginable horror. It was bathed in an otherworldly purple glow, its body seemingly consumed by flickering purple flames. Its surface was riddled with countless, jagged mouths of varying sizes. Damien, unable to comprehend what he was seeing, asked, what are you? The creature's face, or what could be considered a face, came into clearer view. In addition to its bizarre mouths, it was adorned with numerous golden and red spots, making it difficult to discern where its eyes or nose might be. Its voice, deep and resonant like a chasm, boomed, I am he who heralds the end of all light. You may call me Henry. Despite its terrifying appearance and ominous introduction, the name sounded strangely familiar. Damien was bewildered. Why are you here? He demanded. You're not a possible companion. Henry responded with self-assured arrogance. How do you know? I feel like one. Damien countered, drawing on his knowledge. I have read all the books. You are not in any of them. Henry seemed momentarily taken aback by Damien's assertion. He paused, lost in thought. Then, with a renewed sense of conviction, he declared, I could be a demon. You are not. Damien retorted immediately. I am not. Henry conceded, wiping the blood from his face. Damien hesitantly asked Henry to leave. Could you leave? I made a mistake. I did not mean to summon you. Ignoring Damien's plea, Henry stayed and explained enthusiastically with a friendly expression. No, I did not think so. Mortals have such a messed up view of time. You know, just because I am immortal does not mean 1,000 years pass in a flash. The void is so boring. Henry's response was completely unrelated, but it sparked Damien's curiosity. He wondered. The void. Suddenly, Henry grabbed Damien's chin and lifted it. Damien gritted his teeth in fear but tried to hide his terror. Henry said, no matter. I am not going to waste an opportunity. His intention was now clear. Even if Damien had summoned him by mistake, he had arrived and would not be leaving. Damien was still confused and asked, "An opportunity?" Henry replied casually, "Indeed, you asked for a companion. Here I am." Finally understanding the situation, Damien panicked and shouted, I died, just by looking at you. I cannot bond with something like that. Bonding with something you do not understand is foolish." Perhaps at that moment, he realized the folly of ignoring his mother's advice. Henry scoffed, his response brazen, "So is summoning me, yet, here I am. So, how about that bond?" Damien, in a daze, suddenly remembered the spellbook. He quickly turned around to find it. "The banishment runes," he thought, and immediately began erasing the magical chalk markings on the floor. "I refuse. It's time for you to leave." Henry stood towering over Damien, his immense, indistinct form seeming twice or thrice as large as the boy. Yet, Damien stood defiantly, confident that once the magical circle was gone, Henry would have to leave. But contrary to his naive belief, Henry roared in a deep, ominous voice, "I would rather not," and remained firmly in place. Damien was now filled with panic. He couldn't believe his eyes. "How are you still here?" he asked, his heart pounding with growing dread. "This cannot be happening. It is not possible." He refused to accept the reality unfolding before him. Henry, on the other hand, was utterly smug. He grinned, his multiple mouths contorting into grotesque smiles as Damien's despair grew. Runes are such a strict mistress. Even the tiniest mistake, a missing line, can ruin everything. He continued to point out Damien's error. Meanwhile, Damien's eyes were on the book. In the actual magical circle, Henry's voice was faded in the background. "You should be proud. Calling me should have been impossible for you. You have got power." Damien, still surrounded by the undiminished magic circle despite his attempts to erase it, couldn't help but ask, "What do you want with me?" With his usual sinister grin, Henry replied clearly, "Only what you have offered me. I want to roam the mortal plane. But I am stuck here with you. Form a contract with me." He leaned closer, extending a grotesque, hand-like appendage towards Damien's face. It was as if he were trying to entice the boy. "What if we make a deal? I promise I'll never harm you. You'll be completely safe." But Damien remained cautious, and asked, "And if I refuse?" Henry, sensing his persuasion was failing, grew impatient. His tone turned threatening. "I'm not very forgiving. Either we both get what we want, or neither of us do." Summoning his courage, Damien asked another question. "I have another question. Why do you talk normally? You're an ancient monster." Damien's face twisted as he waited for Henry's answer. Henry replied in a deep voice, "This is just a facade. You remember what happened when you saw my true form. No more stalling. Decide." Damien seemed convinced. Reluctantly, he turned away and nodded in agreement to Henry's initial proposal. "Deal." With a whoosh, Henry's form swelled, and dozens of large and small mouths covered his purple, smoky body, all opening wide in a toothy grin. Damien stood tiny in comparison. And then, Henry slithered into Damien's mouth. Damien's eyes went completely white, the pupils disappearing. Perhaps at this moment, the two had formed a pact and merged into one. Damien stood still, his face dark and sullen. When he opened his eyes, they were a strange, violet color, and a sinister smile played on his lips. "Well, that was something," he murmured, as if Henry had become Damien. The real Damien was behind thick iron bars, his expression vacant as if he had no idea what had just happened. From behind the bars, he cried out helplessly, "Help, someone!" But there was no answer. Only the familiar voice of Henry. His sharp teeth drew closer. Slowly, "Don't worry, Damien, you won't be harmed." Damien was filled with despair and panic. He didn't respond, only screamed. He must have deeply regretted his impulsive decision. Outside, Henry, controlling Damien's body, grinned triumphantly. He turned his wrist, savoring the feeling of having a human body. Finally, freedom at least. The mortal plane is long overdue for a culling, he said with a sinister expression. Immediately, he ran towards the exit, seeking his newfound freedom. But before he could go far, he collided with an invisible barrier, and was thrown back, landing hard on the ground. His nose bled from the sudden impact. He groaned in pain. Undeterred, he tried again, this time more cautiously, feeling his way forward. Thud. Again, the invisible barrier blocked his path. He gritted his teeth in anger. His face contorted. "What did you do, boy?" he demanded of Damien. "Trapped." Damien sneered. "I drew a barrier around the circle before I summoned you. I am too weak to break it. And now that we are bonded, you cannot either. Henry glared at him. Oh, what makes you think that? Damien explained calmly. Companions are just as weak as their summoner after bonding. We are stuck here. Henry refused to accept this. You are weak. True, but this barrier will only last 2 weeks at most. Damien remained unfazed. You are right, but there is no food or water here. I will be dead when it falls. And then you will be sent away. Henry finally realized the seriousness of the situation and cursed under his breath. He had tried so hard to get here. To deceive this foolish boy and take over his body. Things were not supposed to end like this. He pondered a solution. Then, with a sly half-smile, he questioned Damien. You are too young to live alone. Someone will seek you out and break the spell when they find your body. Contrary to Henry's confident tone, Damien shook his head coldly. No, they will not. The only one who knows I am here is my mom. Then she will free us both. Henry persisted, convinced that Damien was merely deceiving him. Damien knew his mother would know him well. No, she will ask questions when she sees the barrier. And you will not be able to answer her. But Henry was stubborn. I can just read your mind. Just work with me and make it easier for us both. No, you cannot, Damien asserted firmly. Henry scoffed. Oh, why not? Damien revealed Henry's fatal flaw, exposing his deception mercilessly. You did not know about the barrier I made. You cannot read minds. Henry was startled and could not refute Damien's sharp logic. Damien, on the other hand, smiled confidently, knowing he had struck at the heart of the monster. He was certain he could keep Henry under his thumb. Henry was furious but powerless, while Damien was incredibly satisfied, watching the futility of a powerful monster trapped before him. Knowing he was in a weak position, Henry regained its composure and spoke in a steady voice. Appearing beside Damien, he startled the boy. Henry was no longer arrogant. Its face was filled with worry and its tone was urgent. It rushed to tell Damien, we can expand the terms of the deal to include her life. But Damien remained firm, shaking his head in refusal. No, you are going to do something bad. We are staying here. Unable to maintain his composure any longer, Henry shouted directly into Damien's face, its hands gripping Damien's shoulders tightly. Damien, though startled, remained relatively calm. Are you really prepared to die slowly like this? Henry demanded. Having experienced death once, Damien displayed a calmness that contrasted sharply with Henry's growing desperation. Henry persisted, trying to sway Damien. I could even give you control back over your body every once in a while. Look. As if to emphasize his point, Henry immediately dissolved the cage imprisoning Damien, the iron bars vanishing into thin air, leaving Damien stunned. Henry grinned, trying to win Damien over. See, we could share. Damien, now back in his own body, remained resolute. No, he said firmly, I do not want to die. But neither does anybody else. I will not let you kill people. Henry, losing his temper, retorted, you are bluffing. Damien responded confidently. My mom will be here soon. And she will kill us both to save the world. Henry, now sweating profusely, became increasingly agitated and desperate. You are being rash. You do not know what is waiting for you after death. Damien ignored it, sneering and challenging Henry. I hope you enjoyed your time in the mortal plane. Screw you. Henry, completely losing its patience, snapped. It transformed into a monstrous, grotesque creature, enveloping Damien. Stubborn little idiot, he roared. If you die, that is it. All your dreams gone. Damien looked up, his voice unwavering. I know how dying works. He said, you are about to experience it through me. Henry persisted, trying to tempt Damien. If you let me control you, you will live forever. We can swap control every day. But Damien ignored him, turning away. Enraged, Henry let out a terrifying roar. If it had blood, I think it would have vomited blood and died. Damien finally shouted, stop, to prevent Henry from going completely mad. Hearing this, Henry calmed down. It shrank and became weak, almost lifeless. Damien was speechless. Desperate, Henry searched for a spellbook, hoping to find a way to satisfy his desires. He flipped through the pages, and Damien commented, that has just got summoning contracts. There is nothing to help either of us. But Henry had found something. He excitedly pointed to a page and said, this. The page described, if one party dies, the other will suffer severe damage or die as well. Parts of the soul are exchanged in this contract. Effects can be deadly, even after death. Parts of this contract can still hold. Damien picked up the book and read the description carefully. How will this help? He asked. It is a true binding. An unbreakable contract. We can come to an agreement. Henry said quickly. Damien was not interested. Trading parts of my soul with you sounds like a fate worse than death. Henry panicked and flew around, trying to explain and show goodwill. Nor do I want to give you parts of myself. But nothing is worse than a millennia of boredom. Henry continued. We could both win. You get to live, and I get to see the mortal plane. Even if I have to agree not to destroy it. Damien only focused to read the book carefully. Henry urged. Hurry up. If your mom shows up, it is over for both of us. You said it yourself. Damien still did not look up to talk to Henry. His eyes glued to the pages. Damien eventually refused the offer. We both saw what happened when I trusted you. I am not going to be stupid again. Henry was horrified. It regretted his rash actions, which had ruined everything. The circumstances are different. Damien made a proposal. Then you will accept any terms I set. He picked up a piece of chalk. He began to draw something on the floor. Very focused. Henry watched closely and even commented. You missed a line here. Damien had to look back at the drawing in the book more carefully. They both looked at the sample drawing in the book and analyzed it. And then they both made observations and discussed it in a very cooperative way to create the most accurate and reasonable matrix. After finishing, Henry urged, Go on, start the contract. Damien was not in a hurry. Not yet. Custom terms. Remember, you are not tricking me again. Henry was angry, annoyed that Damien was being so cautious because of its one deception. It opened his mouth wide and cursed. You have gotten awfully cocky. Boy, did you forget who you were dealing with? Without replying, Damien used his foot to erase the chalk marks he had just drawn. Henry panicked and shouted, Stop, stop, all right, you brat, what are your terms? Damien then handed Henry a piece of paper. While Damien was fixing the erased chalk marks, Henry read the conditions stated on the paper. You will not harm any humans, intentionally or not, unless I say you can. By harm, I mean a mortal's definition, not yours. You will also do your best to be a good companion for me. And I will do my best to meet any of your requests I believe are reasonable. I also have the right to end this contract. Henry complained. That is far from fair. You can just end the contract the moment we leave the circle. And I am sent back to the void. Without answering, Damien casually erased the spell he had just written. Henry had to correct himself, saying in the condition that, we must be in agreement to end the contract. Hearing this, Damien rewrote the erased words. Seeing this, Henry understood Damien's acceptance of that term. Its eyes narrowed. It was really annoyed. Hands on its hips, it muttered angrily. Very well, mortal, start the spell. I will do my half. Then the two sat back to back, focusing intently on beginning the contract ceremony. Henry and Damien's hands simultaneously placed on the densely written words on the floor. At that moment, two beams of light simultaneously appeared from those words. One golden from Damien and one dark purple from Henry. The two beams of light gradually spread and intertwined, creating a stark contrast between good and evil. Damien then read aloud the terms he had written on the paper. And Henry had to repeat those words. You will not harm any humans, intentionally or not, unless I say you can. Henry obediently repeated, I will not harm any humans intentionally or not, unless you give permission. By harm, I mean a mortal's definition, not yours. Damien continued, I agree to your definition. Henry gritted his teeth in agreement. You will do your best to be a good companion for me. Damien said, I will attempt to perform the role of a companion to the best of my ability. Henry agreed. In return, I will do my best to meet any of your requests I believe are reasonable. We must be in agreement to end the contract. Damien concluded the oath. Henry also concluded, we must be in agreement to end the contract. As soon as they finished speaking, a white light appeared above their heads and enveloped both of them. At this point, both were extremely focused and closed their eyes. Henry was probably also closing his eyes, but they were unclear where. Then the figures of the two gradually became blurred and merged into one. The contract had been successfully established, and the two, now merged into one. In the brief instant, Damien was lifted into the air. Below him was a soft purple hue tinged with pink, and a white aura at its center. Damien understood Henry, and he knew that Henry was nothing more than a facade, a front to communicate with something unfathomable. Suddenly, Damien's limbs were bound by glowing chains. There was no Henry. There was only it who heralds the end of all light. These were Henry's original words of introduction, and Damien was too shocked to speak. his limbs completely immobilized. Damien saw the inevitable end of the universe. A flickering purple light, and then an expanse of purple aurora before him. And he knew without a doubt that Henry would be there. Damien stared at the void with wide eyes. And in the moment that Damien bore witness to it, who heralds the end of light, the being itself was laid bare. For the first time that it could recall, Henry, too, was staring wide-eyed, arms crossed, observing fragments of Damien's memories from childhood to adulthood. Moments of laughter, tears, and connection with friends and family. Henry watched these images silently for a long time. Looking around, it who heralds the end of all light truly knew the thoughts of a mortal. And as if these memories had a weight of their own, they wrapped around Henry. The emotions associated with them gradually seeped into Henry's consciousness. It knew determination, fear, the longing to live. Henry's golden eyes and terrifying fangs peered into Damien's soul as it tried to comprehend. For the first time, it saw something it did not understand. Outside, after the contract was sealed, Damien was panting, huff, huff. After sharing each other's memories to understand one another better, they reacted in completely opposite ways. One was clutching his head, full of questions. What happened? What did you do? Everything is fuzzy. The other, Henry, seemed unusually refreshed, its human form even more defined as it replied, I have acted according to our contract. Henry continued, I wiped your memory of my true form to preserve your sanity. I have no desire to be tied to a madman. Damien's head spun, and he was furious that Henry had tampered with his memories. Turning to Henry, the being audaciously replied, You are welcome. Then, he began to fade away. Damien was furious with the sly creature. He wiped the blood from his face and gritted his teeth. Exhausted, he decided to sit down within the magic circle, while he waited for his mother to rescue him from the protective circle. Henry taunted, So, come here often. Damien ignored it, too annoyed to respond. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door. The door burst open. Damien's mother, Hilla, rushed in and called out his name. Her voice was hoarse from crying, and her face was full of worry. She gasped at the sight of Damien sitting inside the magic circle. Damien glanced at the spellbook beside him and sighed. With a single punch, his powerful mother shattered the protective spell that had imprisoned him. Without hesitation, she opened her arms wide and pulled him into a warm, comforting embrace. Damien was surprised. He had expected her to be angry and scold him, but her hug was gentle and soothing. After experiencing such a near-death experience, being reunited with his mother and feeling her embrace made him burst into tears. His sobbing startled Henry, who realized he had been tricked. Irritated, it said, You sly little mortal. She never would have killed you. In the dusty, cobweb-filled room, Hilla and Damien sat together. Hilla kept asking, Damien, are you okay? Why are you bleeding? Damien could only stammer, I tried to perform a summoning ritual. I am sorry. His mother worriedly asked, Did it work? Is the monster still here? He nodded hesitantly, talking to himself as well as Henry. I cannot tell her what you really are. Anxious, his mother asked again, So, you have got a companion. What is it? He tried to cover his tracks. A creature from the plane of darkness. Henry, upon hearing this, smiled and complimented him. Good lie. Nice and far from the mortal plane. And I can probably pass as something from there. His mother was puzzled and asked, Is it intelligent? Did you speak with it? Damien mumbled, Yeah, it tested me. Wanted to see if I was strong enough. His mother's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Not many benevolent creatures are going to test you. She scolded, You could have died. Damien, you are lucky nothing worse happened. Releasing a powerful monster on the town could have killed a lot of people. His mother's words darkened Damien's mood. He hung his head, unable to meet her gaze. Henry chimed in, If only she knew. Damien's eyes filled with sadness as he mumbled, I am sorry. Hilla sighed, not knowing what else to say. She scolded him, We will deal with it tomorrow. Mistakes happen, but this was not an impulsive decision. You planned this. Gently, she took his small hands in hers. Picking him up, she carried him away, saying, Do not try to do anything with your companion yet. We need to be careful. In a clean, cozy room, Hilla tucked Damien into bed. Get some rest, and do not waste too much time regretting. Instead, think about how to be better in the future. She kissed his forehead as he snuggled under the covers. As soon as the door closed, Henry spoke up, teasing Damien, Fascinating. You were a single pathetic ring of runes away from destroying the mortal plane. But your mother is telling you not to feel too bad. Damien grumbled, Are you going to talk all night? I am exhausted. Very well. I too shall sleep, Henry replied. The journey from the void was arduous. Do not wake me unless your life is in danger. Damien did not really care. About to fall asleep, he mumbled. I think I'll live through the night. Suddenly, Damien remembered something. He turned around quickly, asking, Wait, how long are you going to sleep? There was no response. Damien was confused, wondering if everything that had happened in the past few hours had been real or a dream. Time passed. It was still the same small house, with the same blue sky and white clouds. But now, a taller boy was getting dressed in the morning sunlight. Turning around, a handsome, angular face with familiar but sharper eyes and broader shoulders revealed it was Damien. Now 17 years old. 4 years passed before Damien spoke with Henry again. Despite Damien's desire to learn magic, the fear of freeing Henry remained at the back of his mind. As much Damien only tried to contact Henry 615 times over the course of those years. Their morning routine remained unchanged. Hilla would serve Damien pancakes, a daily ritual, and there were still only 2 of them. As he still did not eat his breakfast, Hilla asked, Are you going to finish your pancakes? Damien, his face etched with worry, replied hesitantly, I am worried. Will they even let me go to mage college if I cannot prove I have a companion? Hilla, with a calm and reassuring tone, said, What they do not know will not hurt them. Just make sure your companion is awake before the test. Damien, still unable to calm down, covered his face with his hands. I wish I had not been such an idiot when I was 13. He lamented. Hilla smiled softly, her eyes filled with affection. You are still an idiot, she teased. You are just better at hiding it now. Damien's expression softened after his mother's playful remark. Thanks, Mom, he replied. She waved him off casually. No problem. But her relaxed demeanor quickly changed when she saw him toying with his food. And if you are just going to play with your food, you might as well go wait for the mages to arrive, she said, her voice stern. Startled, Damien quickly finished his pancakes. As he was about to leave the table, his mother called out, Hold on, I have something for you. Damien wondered what his mother had for him. Hilla rummaged around for a moment before producing a large, well-worn bag. It is a mage's armor, she said. Damien opened the bag and found a beautiful blue garment inside. Surprised, he pulled out the blue uniform and tried it on. His mother smiled and said, Once you start using magic, this armor will go a long way in protecting you. It even has self-repair runes. He tied the white scarf neatly around his neck, completing the uniform. The long, knee-length blue coat, paired with the long white scarf, was a perfect fit for Damien's tall frame. The uniform not only looked great but also had many useful features. He was really happy with it. Thanks, Mom, he said. It fits great. His mother looked at him with pride. Of course it does. She replied, Now come here. You are not too old for a hug, are you? Damien felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He embraced his mother tightly, grateful for her love and support. Hilla held him close, her eyes closed as if she were trying to memorize every detail of her son. His scent, his feel. Damien held her just as tightly, savoring this moment. Finally, it was time to go. Now get out of here, Hilla said with a playful smile. I have got parties to throw now that I've got the house to myself. Damien turned to leave, but he could not help but look back at his mother one last time. He knew he would miss her terribly. Hilla urged him on. Hurry up, and do not even think about doing badly in school. I will not, Damien replied automatically, already turning to leave. Despite her determination, Hilla could not hold back her tears as she watched her son leave. Bye, Damien, she choked out, wiping away a tear. Damien smiled brightly, trying to reassure her. Bye, Mom, I'll see you soon. As he walked away, he couldn't help but smile. He knew he was lucky to have a mother like Hilla. As Damien walked away, Hilla stood at the door, watching his retreating figure. She knew she would miss him terribly. When he was out of sight, she closed the door and turned back to her empty home. Meanwhile, at the center of town, Damien joined a group of other students waiting to be transported to the Mage Academy. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement as students chatted and laughed. Damien's friends from the village had come to see him off, wishing him good luck. A tall, cloaked man approached a stout man named Shindle. Only 8 this year, Shindle? He asked. Shindle looked around until he spotted Damien. 9. Actually, look who just showed up. Damien is going too. Damien ran up to them, out of breath. I am sorry. I thought I had more time. Shindle replied. There's still time. Red is just early. A man named Red scrutinized Damien, making him feel uneasy. The wagon's only seat 8, so you are in a different one from the rest of your peers. Red said. Sorry. Damien nodded in agreement. Red pointed to a wagon behind him. You are in there. Without hesitation, Damien turned and walked away. From a distance, Schindel called out, Good luck, everyone. Make Ardenford proud. Damien stepped onto the carriage. What he saw inside surprised him. Inside, he found 4 other students, twins who looked very wealthy. A boy with silver hair, and a quiet girl with purple hair sitting in the corner. The blonde boy, Nolan, greeted Damien. That is a surprise. I did not think we'd get another one. His silver-haired friend, Mark, added, Talent is everywhere. Nolan, the more people to train against, the better. As Damien sat down, the blonde girl, who seemed to be Nolan's sister, apologized. We are being rude, she said. I apologize. Her face lit up with a beautiful smile as she introduced herself. I am Rena Gray, Nolan's twin sister. What's your name? Damien blushed slightly and replied, No harm done. Then he introduced himself. I am Damien Vale. As the wagon started moving, made the sound, clatter, clatter. Nolan turned to Mark and said, Mark has already robbed me of the privilege of stating my name, so I will do the same for him. Damien, confused, asked, Mark has gray hair and your last name is Gray. Mark chuckled, while Nolan glared at him. Rena simply watched, unamused. The quiet girl in the corner smiled slightly at Damien's comment. Nolan then quickly changed the topic and turned to Damien. So, what's your companion? Rena quickly scolded Nolan for being rude. Nolan looked innocent, raising his hands in surrender. It's just a question, right, Mark? Mark shrugged nonchalantly. I don't care. You already asked about mine. And I said it was an earth elemental. Damien asked timidly. Oh, from the immortal plane. Rena was intrigued. Do you know a lot about companions? Damien nodded. A little. I've always wanted to be a mage, so I've spent a lot of time reading about them. Nolan scoffed. That sounds like a huge waste of time. You should have spent it training instead. Rena quickly shouted to stop Nolan from rambling. It was as if she was born to rein in Nolan's impulsiveness. Nolan, stop acting like a child, she scolded. Rena then added more about her companion. My companion is a windwhite. Do you know where it's from? Damien replied promptly. The Plane of Stars. His knowledge was truly impressive. Seizing the opportunity, Nolan turned to Damien with a cold stare, saying, 2 of us have shared our companions. Aren't you going to share yours? Damien, on the other hand, looked at him with a look of hesitation. Damien replied awkwardly, scratching his cheek. Mine is from the Plane of Darkness. I do not know what it's called. I don't think anyone has summoned one quite like it yet. The others reacted differently. Mark smiled. Nolan frowned, dissatisfied with the vague answer. While Rena exclaimed, Really? That's incredible. I've never seen anything from the Plane of Darkness. Show us. Damien quickly declined. I cannot. It is being stubborn and won't come out. And the purple-haired girl sitting beside Damien paid attention to him. Nolan looked unconvinced, scoffed, and questioned Damien. Likely story. Why'd they even let you into this wagon? Are you just lying? Damien was startled. What? No. The other wagon was full. Why does it matter which one I am in? Now, not only Nolan but also Rena looked at Damien with hostility. Nolan growled. I knew it. You're just riding along. You aren't one of us at all. Mark said nothing but frowned and covered his mouth. The purple-haired girl seemed indifferent or had lost interest in Damien. Damien was annoyed and retorted. Look, I don't know what your problem is, but you sound like a stuck-up prick. Nolan was not to be outdone. He shouted, We're all here because of extraordinary talent or powerful companions. Rena agreed with Nolan's aggression. Nolan is right. Lying about your companion is pathetic. I bet you do not even have one. Damien, after being accused like that, exploded. I am not lying, but deep down he thought, well, I guess I am, but not for the reason they think. Nolan and Rena seemed unconvinced. They were indifferent to Damien's rebuttal. Damien realized his predicament. He could only remain silent. He mocked himself. Great start. Damien, you are going to have tons of friends at school. The carriage continued its journey, passing through breathtaking scenery. The sky gradually turned a soft yellow, signaling the end of the day. The atmosphere in the carriage grew unusually quiet, a far cry from the earlier chatter. Upon arrival, Damien was relieved. Finally we're here, he thought, eager to leave the carriage and avoid his companions. As the carriage came to a complete stop, Red approached and opened the curtains, announcing, "We are at a waypoint. Get out and stay with your group." Everyone disembarked and noticed the other groups already gathered. They were a lively bunch, dressed in cloaks like Red's, but theirs were in various shades of blue and red. Damien looked at that direction and wondered, "Is that a portal?" One of them approached the purple-haired girl and said, "I will be taking your group through the summoning and testing process." He was a young man with a quill and notebook, his expression devoid of emotion. "You may call me Dross," he continued. "Raise your hand if you already have a companion." Everyone in the carriage, including Damien, raised their hands. Mark, Nolan, and Rena looked particularly proud, while Damien felt nervous and raised his hand hesitantly. Nolan took the opportunity to taunt, "This is your only chance to summon a company. Idiot, don't waste it." Dross, sensing something amiss, asked irritably, "What's that?" "Now," Rena quickly replied, "he is lying about having a companion. He could not summon it." Hearing this, Dross turned to Damien and clarified, "Couldn't or wouldn't." Damien stammered, "It's hibernating right now." Dross, after receiving Damien's answer, still wrote Damien's name and casually replied, "I do not care what any of you think. If the boy has a companion, he will draw upon it for the test. If he does not, he will not be a mage." Then he closed the notebook decisively, concluding with, "Nothing else matters." Rena, who used to complain to Nolan many times, seemed no different from Nolan in her behavior. Shouted, but Dross immediately asserted his authority, merely giving Rena a sharp look. Intimidated, she turned pale and fell silent, unable to meet Dross's gaze. Seeing this, Dross turned away and advised, "Good choice, Gray. I do not take backtalk. Your noble title will get you nothing during the testing. Unlike the colleges, we work directly for the Queen and are impartial. I will remove anyone that does not obey instructions." Dross gave strict instructions as he led the group towards a magical portal. "Now, follow me through the portal." One by one, they stepped through the portal. Damien followed behind, his heart pounding, whispering, "Henry, come on, Henry, now would be a great time to wake up." Then he too stepped through the portal. In an instant, as he squinted his eyes, he found himself in a completely different place, a vast expanse. Immediately, not only he but all the other members of the group began to feel a headache and nausea, as if they were about to vomit. Dross turned around to explain the phenomenon, looking perfectly normal compared to them. "Portal sickness. You will get used to it." He then continued walking forward, over a floor marked with numerous small cracks. He then requested, "All of you supposedly have companions, so we will be skipping the summoning ritual. Any volunteers to start?" Mark yawned and volunteered, "Best to get this over with." While Damien broke out in a sweat after hearing that, Dross praised Mark for his initiative. "Very well. Before we start, what mage officiated your summoning?" Mark replied succinctly, "Some guy named Dread." Dross was quite surprised to hear that name. He asked again, "Dread, I was unaware he assisted in summonings." Mark replied casually, "He made an exception for me." Then he asked, "Now, how do I do this?" Dross appreciated Mark's straightforward attitude. Straight to the point. "I like that." Then Dross began to instruct. "Place your hands on the brazier and channel energy. It will detect your companion's strength." Mark followed instructions and took a deep breath to channel energy. At that moment, a flickering red light appeared above the brazier. Suddenly, a spark flared up, startling Mark. Dross observed from behind, "That is sufficient. Release the bowl." Mark asked curiously, "How'd I do?" Dross replied, "You did." Then Dross continued to call on the next person. "Now, who's next?" Damien watched Mark, admiring his confidence. He gritted his teeth, and in his heart, Damien cursed Henry. "Damn it, Henry, we are running out of time." Nolan volunteered this time, glancing at Damien with a challenging look. Nolan Gray, we'll go." Dross agreed. "Wonderful. Please step this way, Nolan." While Nolan began to perform the ritual, Damien continued to call out to Henry. "Henry, Henry, I need you. Wake up." Deep down, Henry was fast asleep, but Damien's call was beginning to reach him. "Henry, wake up." Finally, it awoke by the voice from Damien. That monster Damien had made a pact when he was only 13 years old. And as soon as he woke up, he immediately cursed at Damien. "You insolent insect, I am sleeping." Henry's sudden awakening put a lot of pressure on Damien. Damien gritted his teeth and complained, "You cannot keep sleeping. I am testing to get into college, and I will fail if you do not show up. Also, please stop melting my brain." Henry responded sheepishly, Whoops, let too much of myself out. I have toned it back to avoid popping your head like a grape. Despite this, Damien's head still throbbed. He leaned on the purple-haired girl beside him and sarcastically thanked Henry. Henry then chimed in. Failing would be troublesome. We need you to get in so we can get stronger and destroy the world. The girl noticed Damien's weariness and his sarcastic thanks. Henry continued his mental commentary. And stop worrying so much. I can hear your surface thoughts now that we have bonded. All this anxiety and fear is disgusting. Damien, still sweating and confused, asked, You can read my thoughts. Henry groaned internally. Gah, stop that. It is like I am being attacked with your worthless emotions. Just stop thinking. Damien was still worried. But what if you failed the test? Henry scoffed. I am going to pretend you did not just imply I could fail. Then, Henry reminded Damien. And I suggest you release the girl you are holding onto. Damien was startled and quickly let go of the girl. Apologizing profusely, the girl calmly smiled. It's okay. I thought you'd lost it after watching the gray boy do so well on his test. Damien looked towards Nolan, who was currently undergoing his test and performing exceptionally well. But Damien was no longer concerned with Nolan's petty talent. He replied nonchalantly, I do not care how well he does. He is just a dick. The purple-haired girl warned him. He is part of a powerful noble house. You should not make an enemy of him. Damien brushed her off. He did all the enemy making by accusing me of lying. Henry chuckled internally. You were lying. Damien's face darkened. The girl shrugged. Whatever you say. Nolan finished his test, and Rena excitedly congratulated him. Good job, Nolan. Dross, seemingly unimpressed, pointed at Rena and said, It sounds like you'd like to go next. Rena pouted at his attitude. Dross did have a bad impression on Rena. But she still went through with her test. At that moment, no longer whispering, Damien communicated with Henry telepathically. Do you think she heard me talking to you? Henry replied, You were basically whispering into her ear. Luckily you didn't say anything important. Damien breathed a sigh of relief. Wonderful. Is there anything we need to do to prepare for this? Henry smugly replied, I could burn a hole through the roof if I wanted to. But that would drain your body and kill you in the process. Damien sighed. Let's not do that. I'd like to survive. Henry scoffed. Boring. But even if you could handle that much power, we do not need the attention. Meanwhile, Rena was struggling with her test. Her white flame, representing her power, was weak and flickering. She was clearly nervous and trying her best. But it was not enough. Dross, impatient, called out. Next. Rena panicked and protested. Wait, I was nervous. Dross ignored her, insisting. I said next. Although reluctant, she had to stop. Nolan tried to comfort her. Do not worry, Rena. The average person cannot even get their flames up to their head. Frustrated that no one was stepping forward, Dross shouted again more loudly. Next. The mysterious purple-haired girl raised her hand and said, I'll go. I was helped by someone from the front lines. He has requested to remain anonymous. Dross nodded, seemed that he did not care, and gestured her to the testing area. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the energy brazier. A deep purple light appeared. Unlike the others, the flame was tall but contained. She remained calm throughout the process. After finishing, she slowly withdrew her power. Then she turned to Dross. He commented excitedly, Not very powerful, but incredible control. Well done. The others were surprised to what Dross had just said. Nolan even had to exclaim, Did he just compliment someone? Dross impatiently urged the next person to go. Next. Now, we have a schedule to keep. Finally, it was Damien's turn. His legs suddenly moved without his control. As he stepped forward reluctantly, Rena and Nolan snickered. Henry prompted, Plains, we're going to need to get you some confidence. You walk around like a whipped dog. Damien nervously replied, Shut up, I just want to pass this. Dross asked Damien who helped him summon his companion. Damien replied, I summoned my companion on my own. I had no help. Damien began his test, taking a deep breath. As soon as his hand touched the brazier, a massive, pitch-black flame erupted, shooting high into the air. Damien was astonished by the raw power he had unleashed. Henry reminded him, That's all you are getting. And do not forget that was my power. If you want it, you are going to have to work for it. Nolan and Rena were stunned, their faces paling. Damien was still in shock as well. Henry continued, Don't get a big head. You have got no skills yet. Any of the others here could wipe the floor with you. Despite Henry's teasing, Damien was grateful for his timely awakening and the immense power he had displayed. Thanks for that, he replied. After releasing his grip, the dark flame gradually subsided. Henry said, before you ask, yes, I intentionally made our fire go just slightly higher than Nolan's. Damien was speechless at Henry's pettiness. Henry even admitted, and, yes, I am that petty. Finished with the test, Damien turned to face the others. His expression a mix of anticipation and anxiety. And as expected, their reactions were varied. Nolan and Rena were furious, their pride wounded by Damien's unexpected power, especially after they had mocked him for lying about having a companion. The mysterious girl was wide-eyed in surprise. Mark found it amusing, a playful smile on his face. Dross looked both shocked and skeptical. Damien, initially taken aback, quickly recovered his composure. With a confident grin, he said casually, well, would you look at that? My companion woke up. At this moment, Dross seemed to be deep in thought. Once he regained his composure, he continued his work, writing something in a notebook. As he did so, he said, noted, all of you have displayed enough talent to be admitted to a mage college. Congratulations. Nolan responded enthusiastically. That was a given. Did I get into Kingsfront? Shortly after, a wisp of white smoke appeared beside Dross. He exclaimed, look at that, right on time. He reached into the smoke and pulled out something. Your college assignments have arrived. The smoke dissipated as soon as he withdrew his hand, and he read the information on the paper for everyone to hear. Huh, interesting. You have all been accepted to Blackmist. Nolan was furious upon hearing this. Shouting the name, Blackmist, his expression was one of disbelief. Dross, unhurried, explained, Year 1s are sent to a mage college at random. Gray, I am sure you should be aware of that. If you are dissatisfied with the result, you may attempt to transfer after the first year. Both Nolan and Rena were extremely upset and began to question Dross loudly. Nolan said, wait, you mean I did not get into Kingsfront? Sure, there is random selection, but that's for. Rena immediately continued Nolan's words. People that are not nobles. Everyone knows nobles go to Kingsfront. Dross did not seem to care, merely scoffing at the Grey siblings' childish behavior. He replied, then I suppose you two are not great nobles. Welcome to the sea, pond dwellers. You do not matter anymore. Both Nolan and Rena were shocked by this revelation. While Dross laughed loudly, Rena could not help but ask, why are all of us assigned to Blackmist? What happened to random? Dross maintained his mocking tone, replying, you got unlucky. Random does not mean equal distribution of every group that comes through here. And like you and your brother say, random does not hold the same meaning for everyone. Another teleportation portal opened right in front of everyone. Dross finished explaining, looks like a lot of you are all equally unimportant. If I cared, I would apologize. Now get in the portal. Your future awaits. One by one, they stepped through the portal. Damien, in particular, had a different attitude this time. As Henry had awakened, he walked more confidently and the mysterious girl was by his side. He silently thought, I don't care what college I got into. All that matters is that I got into one. After passing through the portal, they were greeted by a magnificent place, far more grand than the testing area they had been in before. Standing there for a moment, he thought, the teleportation didn't feel quite as bad this time. But before he could finish his thought, he felt a wave of nausea, and his face turned pale. He ended up vomiting. From a distance, a man's voice called out, it's a long-distance teleport. A rather young man spoke up, reminding Damien, you aren't the first to throw up, and you won't be the last. Damien stood up. Behind him, the mysterious girl looked calm. Mark seemed to be feeling unwell too, and the Grey siblings were taking turns vomiting. Before Damien now was a majestic mountainous landscape, adorned by a golden sunset. It was an ideal place to watch the sunset. Looking around at everyone, Henry's voice echoed in Damien's mind, reminding him, put your guard up, Damien, you must not allow my true nature to be revealed. Mortals will not hesitate to kill you if they discover what I am. Damien understood and nodded, becoming wary of those around him. The guide asked for confirmation. You five were tested by Dross. Right, Nolan quickly responded, introducing himself. We were. I am Nolan Gray, and this. Before he could finish, the man, with an arrogant attitude just like Dross, interrupted, I don't care. We are at the edge of the kingdom and only barely under the queen's reign. As he spoke, he used his magic to create a sphere. From within the sphere, as if from a spatial container, he took out 5 light brown bracelets and declared, your status will not help you here. After distributing the bracelets, he instructed, "Put these on and look at the information Dross input." Then, he turned and gradually vanished in a cloud of black smoke. His face still cold as he left with one final instruction. "It should keep you occupied until the dean gets things started." He disappeared, leaving only purple ashes in the air. Damien still held the bracelet in his hand, marveling at the man's display. Curious about the information recorded about him, he did not hesitate to put it on. Damien continued to examine the bracelet that fit perfectly on his wrist. Meanwhile, Henry stroked his chin thoughtfully. This should keep Damien occupied for a while. It has been too long since I've reported back. With that thought, he used his powers to summon his true form. He wanted to inform his situation as well as Damien. The surrounding space sparkled with thousands of stars against the backdrop of the endless darkness of the sky. Henry called out, "Herald!" A mystical, shimmering white light appeared in the dark sky. From this light, a humanoid figure with long hair formed. Han listened to Henry's report. He is impressionable. The boy has not even stopped to wonder why we seek to destroy the mortal plane. With a little more work, he will do as I will. The herald's face hardened, and its eyes narrowed. Henry trembled and continued, "There's no need to be like that. We designed me like this. If you didn't want me to talk, you should have thought about that earlier. Besides, the boy never would have trusted me if I was anything like you." He continued to explain to the herald. "The others did not make it either. How is that possible? I will investigate. It should not be difficult to get permission to leave when he goes to sleep." Seeming satisfied with this plan, the herald gradually faded away. Henry stood there watching him dissolve into sparkling particles in the sky. It stood there, stunned. It was scared and did not know how to respond, wondering if the herald was truly satisfied with what it had said. Outside, after the guide had left, Mark, annoyed by the man's attitude, said to Damien, "That guy was a bit dramatic." Damien, meanwhile, was intently examining the bracelet he had been given. "These runes, some of them look familiar. I have been studying runes ever since I could read in preparation to summon a companion. But there are so many new ones too. I have so much to learn." Henry appeared and snapped, "Stop staring at the stupid thing and use it. I am bored." Damien, frustrated by Henry's sudden enthusiasm, replied curtly, "Yes, yes." But then they both fell silent as there was no reaction from the bracelet. Damien lamented, "It doesn't do anything." Henry was about to give advice when Damien interrupted, excitedly saying what he had just discovered. "Oh, I should use mental energy." Henry was annoyed at being interrupted and muttered, "Listen to me, you brat." Ignoring Henry, Damien took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Using his own energy, the bracelet began to glow, and something projected from it. Damien's information appeared before him. Name, Damien Vale. School, Blackmist College. Year, 1. Major, undecided. Minor, undecided. Companion, null. Magical strength, 3.4. Magic control, 5. Magical energy, 8. Physical strength, 2. Endurance, 3. Henry stood beside him, reading the information and stroking his chin. Annoying little device. Not very strong, though, he muttered. I hid myself from it. So we can continue with our little lie about my origin. But do not let your guard down. One little slip-up and we are both dead. Damien expressed his dissatisfaction with the information Dross had given him. How can they just slap a number on my abilities? All they had to go off is what Dross said. Mark mused over his own information, replying to Damien, I think someone told me it was more of a guess. I was not really listening. Though, this stuff is useless. All that matters is how well you can fight. Rena added, these are just the basic bracelets. There are much better ones that we have back at home. But Damien did not think so. He thought, these must be really expensive. Mark shrugged, no clue. I have not had any chance to try out using money yet. Suddenly, a flash of purple and black light swept through the group. A misty figure swirled above them, and a woman's voice said, Greetings, new students. I'm Wisp, the acting dean for this year. A woman gradually appeared. She looked very stylish and young, with a confident and proud demeanor. She continued, the real dean is currently off in the wastes looking for a new weapon. As he broke his last one over the head of a devourer beast. After her introduction and explanation of the dean's absence, the students laughed. They thought Wisp was joking. But Wisp was not joking. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at the laughing students. Realizing they had made a mistake, they looked at each other awkwardly, some coughing to avoid her gaze. Wisp was genuinely angry. She snapped at the students. If you do not know what a devourer beast is, well, there is a reason we have a library. Now, should I have the misfortune of dealing with you, you may refer to me as Dean Wisp." The sudden change in her demeanor made Damien feel uneasy about her. He turned to the purple-haired girl and said, "Is she crazy?" She replied worriedly, "Looks like it." Wisp continued to guide the new students. "I have been told that I am required to give you a tour of our main facilities. Please try to pay attention so I do not have to answer questions. What you are all currently experiencing is a spell in the astral school called astral protection." As she spoke, Damien felt a light in his chest. His soul seemed to leave his body, while his physical form remained stationary. The dean reassured them, "Your bodies will be safe until you return to them. Better yet, you will all be unable to speak until it is over." Damien, in spirit form, asked Henry worriedly, "Astral protection, will she be able to see you?" Henry was also concerned. "Doubtful, but if she does, I will kill her," he said decisively, then vanished. Together, in spirit form, they followed Wisp. As they flew high, they could see the entire school. Wisp continued, "This should help you to get a better understanding of the school grounds." Flying high up, the view was absolutely breathtaking. Damien could not help but exclaim, "This is incredible," but being in spirit form, he could only think it to himself. The school was built on a solid foundation, surrounded by tall, dense trees. In the distance were towering mountains. Wisp explained, "These mountains are where you'll all live. They're rich with ether, which will help increase the rate of your growth until you can evolve your cores. Your teachers will tell you more about that." Then, they came to a very large building with 3 tall gates. "This is a building you should become intimately acquainted with in the coming years," Wisp said. It was the library. Inside, everything was bright and sparkling. Rows of books lined tall, sturdy shelves, and everyone was impressed. Wisp folded her arms and said sternly, "It is boring, but it's got some use in keeping you brats distracted." They continued to explore, and Henry whispered, "We are not wasting any time in there. I know everything you could ever possibly need to know." Damien disagreed, "But I want to be a researcher and discover new runes." Henry was annoyed and wondered, "Why would you waste your time studying how to write when I can teach you real magic?" Damien negotiated, "Can't I learn both?" Henry was pleased. "That's the attitude. We will make a conqueror of you yet. Never compromise. Always take what you want. With everyone other than me. That is, compromise with me." Damien was speechless. Wisp then introduced where they were standing. "This is the mess hall. You can eat here, should you want to." Then she pointed to an area with a red-tiled roof, with chairs and tables for sitting outside. "And this is the student service building. In case you have problems with the college. It's empty, by the way. I'm just contractually obligated to tell you it's here." It seemed like a place that was there more for show than anything else. They also visited the treasure pavilion. "If any of you aren't completely incompetent, you might be able to get some rewards from it." Then, everyone moved to an open area, and Wisp introduced it, saying, "And this is the central courtyard. It has portals to all over the kingdom and campus." Finally, Wisp concluded the tour. "There are other things on campus, but I don't have to show you them. So figure it out yourself. Consider your tour over." Instantly, everyone's spirits disappeared. Then they all returned to their bodies. Damien smiled appreciatively at the headmistress, saying, "Nice lady," and in a rare moment of male camaraderie, Nolan mirrored his expression and agreed, "Hey, yeah," but then he realized he had agreed with Damien and was startled. Henry warned cautiously, "Stay away from that woman. If I'd been a bit slower at concealing myself, she would have detected me." Damien replied calmly but inwardly worried, "Please don't kill any of my teachers." Henry replied nonchalantly, "No promises." At that moment, 3 people approached the group. A short-haired woman with yellow eyes and simple clothing clasped her hands behind her back and said, "Welcome to Blackmist. I have been drafted. Elected as your greeter. I am sure you have a lot of questions. But spare me until we get to your rooms." Rena was happy. "We do not all have to room together. Thank goodness." But she seemed to have said something wrong, as the guide stared at her, forcing her to look away. The guide continued with the annoying voice, "Some of you will. There was a time when Blackmist was big enough to give everyone their own room. But that is not the case anymore. Now follow me through the portal." Then they all walked through the teleportation portal together. The portal glowed brightly as she announced, "We are going to see your rooms." And the landscape changed once more. They were now in a mountainous area with caves. Damien noticed, that portal did not make me as sick as the last one did." Looking at the caves, He thought, these are the rooms. They look like caves. Nolan wondered, how many of us have to share rooms? The guide replied, I'd get to that if you would stop asking questions. There are 3 rooms for the 5 of you. 2 sets of you will have to room together. The Gray siblings immediately protested, while the others were simply surprised. The guide sighed and added, before you ask, the one that gets to decide who rooms with who is me. Then she walked, guiding everyone, saying, I am going to go ahead and stick the 2 that cannot listen to instructions in the same room. I think that's what they wanted. Anyway, the Gray siblings finally relaxed and smiled in satisfaction. Works for me, Nolan said. They all followed the guide along a path up the cliffside. The guide turned and asked, do any of you really desire to be in the single room? I am inclined to give it to. What was your name? The mysterious girl finally revealed her name. Sylph. The guide finished the question. To give it to Sylph. Mark, from behind, spoke up, actually, and rummaged in his pocket. Then he handed a piece of paper to the guide, saying, I have this. The guide wondered what it was. After reading the contents of the paper, her expression changed dramatically. Ah, well, that's a damn good reason. The solo room is all yours. I am not stupid enough to question Professor Dredd. Then she turned and pointed at Damien, saying, the 2 of you will room together. Then, she was pointing at Damien and Sylph. Damien exclaimed in surprise, what? While Sylph just frowned slightly, seemingly displeased, but replied, okay. Standing beneath the towering cliffs, the guide explained in detail about how the rooms were created. There's some minor space magic being used to compress the distance it takes to get to your room. Just make sure you think of where you're headed, or it won't work. Damien thought to himself, space magic is an interesting idea. Looking down from the level of the dorms, it was very high above the ground. Damien could even get a panoramic view of the entire school from there. The guide produced some silver cards, saying, now to officially assign your rooms. The cards were immediately controlled to fly and attach themselves to the entrances of the cave rooms. Nolan and Rena would be together. Mark would have a single room, and the remaining 2 would be Damien and Sylph. Pointing towards the rooms, she said, you are welcome to change your rooms however you like. They will be returned to their normal form when you graduate. Henry, who had been eavesdropping, said excitedly, perfect. A lair to scheme in. All we have to do is get rid of the girl. Damien was increasingly annoyed by this attitude and said, shut up, please. After finishing her task, the guide left, saying, I have got more students to nanny. So I'll be off for a few hours. Get used to your lodgings. I'll be back later today. She turned and left, while the others went to their respective rooms. Damien approached his room and said, so, this is it, huh? A feeling of nostalgia washed over him. My new home. A very simple room appeared, with no door and nothing else but 2 beds and a small shelf in the middle. He sighed, thinking of the soft blankets and warm bed in his mother's house. Shaking himself back to reality, Damien calmly began to organize his belongings. He folded his clothes, gathered his papers, pens, toiletries, and some pouches of money. Henry, still excited, made an odd suggestion. Say, maybe you should let me out to say hi to your new friend, of course. Damien flatly refused. Henry persisted with a childish reason. Come on, you are being rude. At least introduce yourself. You are going to need pawns if we are going to conquer the world. This time, Damien was genuinely annoyed and unconsciously snapped. Shut up. Sylph, who overheard, turned around, looking very confused and slightly annoyed. She raised her voice and asked, I am sorry. Damien realized he had made a mistake and quickly apologized. What? No, not you. I am so sorry. I was. Sylph understood and asked, talking to your companion. Damien was a bit surprised and replied, yes, actually, I did not realize a lot of people did that. Sylph said casually, I don't think they do. But you had that spacey look when you were taking the test with Dross. Henry bit his nails, looking thoughtful. She is a little sharper than I expected. I take it back. Do not talk to her. You are probably going to spill something important on accident. Damien was annoyed by being belittled. I am not. Shut up. He forced a smile, awkwardly offering his hand to Sylph. Yeah, I was talking to my companion. I am Damien, by the way. Sylph did not return the handshake, but replied, I know. Your name is next to the door. Right above mine. Henry laughed crazily at this, while Damien blushed and could only reply, yeah, I guess it is. Sylph found Damien's reaction quite amusing and smiled slightly. She turned to greet him. I am just giving you a hard time. I am Sylph. They shook hands, and Damien politely replied, nice to meet you, Sylph. Suddenly, Sylph noticed something in Damien's belongings and asked, what's in there? Henry, like a persistent fly, butted in, nosy. She is going to be disappointed when she finds out it's all boring. Though, Damien did not care and replied honestly. Mostly rune drawing stuff, spare clothes, and other necessities, nothing fancy. Sylph seemed genuinely unimpressed, frowning thoughtfully but saying nothing. Damien was confused and did not want Sylph to think he only carried useless things. So he explained, rune drawing is a lot more useful than people think. It is vital to our life as mages and making new spells. Sylph replied, I do not doubt that. I just thought that college would provide the basic stuff we need. Damien didn't think so. He looked around his new, simple room with disappointment and said, they did not even give us a whole room. Maybe there is something in that hole in the back. So, they both approached the hole in the back of the cave, which should now be called their room. Damien could not see anything inside. Why is it so dark in here? TTS still daytime outside. There should be at least a little light. Henry explained, there are runes limiting the light entering your room. And almost other things. Damien replied with an excited tone and a devious smile. Well, that's just great. Sylph turned and asked, concerned, did you just reply to yourself? Or was that the friend in your head? Damien replied awkwardly, it sounds weird when you put it like that. And yeah, I was talking to it. Henry then interjected, focusing on his pronoun, he, not it. I have decided I like being male. Also I've made myself a. Damien interrupted Henry before he could finish. But they both probably understood what he was creating. Sylph was curious about Damien's conversations with Henry. If you are going to talk to it, you could at least tell me what it's saying. Damien had changed his pronoun for Henry. He said that he has decided to be male. As of a few seconds ago. Also, there are runes blocking the light entering our room for some reason. Hearing this, Sylph had the same reaction as Damien earlier. Well, that's just great. Damien became interested in this and picked up a piece of chalk. I might be able to do something about this. Actually. Then he began to meticulously draw on the stone wall. At this point, he also pondered the emptiness of the room. Couldn't they at least have given us a curtain? Sylph agreed. They didn't give us anything at all. Damn it, do you think we get an allowance? Damien didn't think so. He replied, no chance. I am surprised they aren't charging us to live here. Why? Is something wrong? Sylph confessed. I didn't bring anything with me. Damien was astonished. Really? Not even a toothbrush. It made sense, considering she had thought the school would provide the basics. Sylph asked Damien a question that left him speechless. What does the word anything mean to you? Damien replied, right, well, I am sure there's a general store. Maybe you could get something there. Sylph blushed and lowered her head, saying, I don't have any money either. When I said I didn't bring anything, I meant all I've got is my clothes and daggers. Both Damien and Henry were shocked. Their jaws dropped as they stared at her. Henry exclaimed, oh, lovely. She's somehow even more incompetent than you are. Sylph was starting to feel overwhelmed by her situation. Damien offered a kind smile and said, I think I might have some spare things that you could use. Henry, being stingy, tried to stop Damien. Don't you dare give her any of our stuff. Damien didn't care and replied, it's my stuff, not ours, and I'll do what I want with it. Henry acted as if he needed to share his toiletries. Which was quite funny. Damien found an extra toothbrush and soap and gave them to Sylph. Here, I've got some extras. I don't think I'll be able to help much with clothes. Though, Sylph was grateful. Thank you. I doubt you are going to want these back. But I'll pay you once I've got some money. Damien smiled. Don't worry about it. They were just spares in case something went wrong. Sylph asked, do things generally go wrong in a way that makes you need another toothbrush? Damien scratched his head. This is the first time I've left my town, but statistically, every time I've left home has resulted in someone needing a spare toothbrush. Sylph blushed and replied, that's fair. Then she noticed that their room didn't have a door and the wind was starting to blow in. She unconsciously huddled closer to avoid the wind and cold. They both looked at the gaping entrance and Damien said, yeah, Beth said we'd be allowed to modify the rooms how we wanted. Though, Sylph agreed, I suppose we're meant to do some renovation. Damien grumbled, honestly, it just seems like the school is too cheap to actually give us anything useful. Sylph clicked her tongue. I'd agree, but they also reset how the previous students left the rooms. That's more effort than doing nothing. Damien's eyes lit up. That's a good point. Do you think it's some kind of test? Self wondered. To get a door. They both sighed, realizing how absurd it was to think that getting a door would be a test. Damien said, I don't know. I've never been to a mage college before. Self shared the same feelings. Neither have I. Looking around the cramped space, Self exclaimed, there isn't even any room to train. Henry whispered, the mage told you that you've got time to kill. But she didn't say you had to spend it here. She just suggested it. Damien stroked his chin. That's true. We could go check out the rest of the campus. Henry agreed, urging him, better than sitting here. I can practically feel the teenage tension creeping into me. Keep it up and I might end up with acne. Damien replied, you'd think something that has lived for as long as you would have thicker skin. Then he turned to Self and said, I am going to take a look around the campus. Self showed a bit of excitement with the idea and wanted to follow. That's a good idea. I will join you. Damien nodded and smiled. Just give me a second to pack my stuff up so I can bring it with me. He gathered his belongings and said, I am not leaving my stuff here until we've got a door. Self wondered, I doubt anyone wants to steal your clothes. Damien, otherwise, had another worry. Maybe someone else forgot their toothbrush. It was a funny thought but also quite convincing. Self was startled. She quickly gathered the 2 items Damien had given her, then gently put them in her small bag. Then, together, they stepped out and began to explore the campus on their own. As they wandered around, they noticed that the Gray's room now had a regal purple curtain. Damien thought, well, they clearly came prepared. Maybe I can raid their room for supplies. Henry was thrilled with the idea, exclaiming, that is the spirit. But Damien's enthusiasm waned, and he muttered, never mind. Anything you're enthusiastic about is probably a terrible idea. Damien and Self continued their descent down the mountain. Once they reached the bottom, they wandered around the school grounds. Damien asked Self, thoughts on where to go first? Self replied, nowhere in specific, but we should make sure to be back in 2 hours so we don't miss Beth. Damien scratched his head, feeling a bit embarrassed. How about getting some food? I kind of left my breakfast in the courtyard when we arrived. His stomach grumbled in agreement. Self smiled and said, sounds good to me. I think food is in the long building near the library. So, relying on their memory, they headed toward that building. Meanwhile, the school grounds were bustling with activity, filled with students chatting and laughing. Damien overheard someone saying, right, Magister Dread is awful. I swear he just enjoys torturing his students. This made Damien pause. There's that name Dread again. He thought. A female student in the group was complaining. He dropped me off a cliff this morning. Another student tried to comfort her, saying, he's not so bad once you get used to the pain. Damien turned to Self and said, I hope I don't get stuck with him. Self replied nonchalantly, I'll settle for anything at this point. I half expect Blackmist to make us pay for our teachers as well. They continued on their way. As the evening sun cast long shadows, a cool breeze rustled through the trees. Damien and Self focused on their destination. When they reached a certain spot, Damien exclaimed, whoa, the floor is completely covered in runes. He kneeled down to examine them more closely, saying, it must have taken years to do all this. Self was less impressed. I don't know enough about runes to be impressed. But they'll still be here after we eat. Let's go. I'm starving. Finally, they arrived at the dining hall. Damien panted, phew. That was a lot farther than it looked. Henry teased, it's because you're fat and out of shape. Damien retorted, I'm not fat. I'm wearing a hot coat. But when he looked at himself, he blushed slightly. Finally, he had to admit, I'll admit I'm a little out of shape. Though, Self interrupted Damien's thoughts about his weight, saying, it's a bit far, but this is better than having to hunt for food ourselves. This surprised Damien, and he asked, where did you live to have to hunt yourself? Self turned and replied simply, the woods. Damien was unsatisfied with her brief answer and thought, is she not going to elaborate? But Self had already turned and walked away. Inside the dining hall, laughter and chatter filled the air. They stood in line together, waiting for their food. A cheerful-looking cook asked, welcome to the dining hall. What can I get for you? Without hesitation, Self asked, do you have anything free? Damien was caught off guard. The cook and the other students were surprised. Free? Are you sure? Self pouted and replied, yes, I don't have money to spend on food right now. Suddenly, a handsome blonde student raised his hand and said to the cook, I'll cover her meal. He looked older than Damien and Self. Approaching them, he asked Damien, are you new as well? Damien replied, yeah, we are roommates. The The new guy was incredibly generous. Pointing at himself, he said, I will cover both of your meals. What do you two want? Damien was taken aback. Are you sure? You don't need. Before Damien could finish, the other guy laughed and replied, trust me, it's not a big deal. Sylph said thanks and didn't hesitate to order her food. Could I get something with protein? Is there pheasant? The woman smiled and replied, of course. And you? Damien hesitated. He asked Henry in his mind, would it be weird to order pancakes? Henry couldn't care any less. It doesn't matter. Just order something. So Damien decided on something different. Could I get pasta or something? The other guy smiled and told the cook. The usual. Please. Unfortunately, the cook didn't recognize him. I don't know who you are. He looked disappointed. Oh come on, he said, but the cook's expression remained cold. Trying to salvage his pride, he scratched his head and said, the lasagna. Then he turned to Damien and Sylph, putting his arm around them. Come on, you two, let's find a place to sit. After finding a seat, he introduced himself. I'm Sean. I take it that today's your first day. They both replied, yes. Sean continued, then welcome to Blackmist. It's a good mage college, even if it's a bit unorthodox. But between us, it's the best one. Sylph asked with an unbelievable attitude. Is it really? Sean reluctantly admitted the truth. Not in the slightest. That's Kingsfront. Doesn't mean we can't ignore them though. To alleviate the awkwardness, Damien said, I really appreciate the generosity. But was there a reason you bought us food? What was wrong with the free stuff? Sean didn't mean to hide anything. He genuinely said, everything. It's a plate of mush. Everyone ends up trying it once. But almost nobody I know goes for it again. I am pretty sure I've seen it move around on its own. Damien was grateful for Sean's kindness. Ah, in that case, thanks for the rescue. Sean replied, no problem. Just pass the favor along at some point in the future. Then a glowing rune circle appeared on the table in front of them. Sean explained, this rune circle is how our food arrives. So do you know who your professor is yet? Damien replied, not yet. It's our first day. Remember, we just got here and had a few hours to kill. Sean said excitedly, oh, yeah, I remember that bit. I don't think I left my room until someone came to get me. Maybe the new students are getting bolder. Suddenly, a tall man with a scarred face appeared behind Damien and Sylph. Or dumber, he said. The two freshmen turned around. Their faces pale. He was a man with a buzz cut, a stern expression, and a long scar on his cheek. He had his hands in his pockets. Sean greeted him casually. Hello, Don. Don't be rude. They're new students. Ignoring the situation, Don already stood between Damien and Sylph and yawned. Damien was startled. Is he a ghost or something? Sean introduced his rude friend with awkwardness. This is Don. He's crass, but he's a damn good fighter. He also happens to be one of my teammates. While Sean was introducing him, Don was picking his nose. Sylph seemed worried and asked, is fighting important at Blackmist? Incredibly, Sean replied, Blackmist has produced some of the best combat mages ever. Even Kingsfront graduates respect us. Well, those of us who graduate. Meanwhile, Don sat right next to him and continued picking his nose. Suddenly, Don commented, the training is a lot of fun. As well as wiping his dirty finger on his shirt. Henry couldn't stand Don's behavior anymore. He shouted in Damien's ear. Gah, doesn't he have any shame? Not even I would do that. Damien chuckled. You don't even have a nose. Sean continued instructing the newcomers. In fact, you'll probably take part in placement matches soon. The school needs to know where everyone stands so students can pick teams. Damien wondered. Teams? For what? The requests Dean Wisp mentioned. Sean confirmed. Correct. Teams are made of 2 or 3 people that work, train, and basically live together. The image of students with different combat abilities was shown, representing the need for compatible teammates. Sean folded his hands at his front and said proudly, you want to work with someone who has talents that complement yours for the best results. Damien began to worry. Does that mean my teammates will find out about Henry? He imagined a horrifying scenario where someone discovered Henry's existence and got killed. And the culprit would be none other than Henry. His face turned pale, his lips pursed, and his heart raced, thinking nervously, if that happened, he'd definitely look for a way to skirt our contract and get them killed. Sean confirmed. Correct. Teams are made up of 2 or 3 people who work, train, and basically live together. This is an image of students with different combat abilities, emphasizing the need for compatible teammates. Folding his hands, Sean proudly stated. You want to work with someone whose talents complement yours for the best results. Damien nodded, a little overwhelmed, and simply replied, I see. Just then, the food arrived. The circle next to Sean began to glow. And he announced, oh, the food is ready. A steaming lasagna appeared in front of him. He picked up his knife and fork, exclaiming, yummy. Similar glowing circles appeared in front of Damien and Sylph. They both exclaimed, thanks for the meal, Sean. And yes, thank you. This was very kind, Sean replied. No problem. As he ate, Sean cheerfully remarked, once you start going on quests, you'll have plenty of money. Between the gold and the contribution points you earn, you'll be swimming in coins before long. Damien and Sylph listened while eating. While Damien seemed to be enjoying his meal, Sylph ate more slowly. Sean commented, soon you'll be the ones buying food for the first years crazy enough to try the free meal. Damien's face turned a bright red from enjoyment as he ate. And he mumbled, tastes almost like home, but mom's is better. Turning to Don, Sean asked, what did you get, Don? Don replied simply, the usual. In front of Don was a plate piled high with fried eggs. He chewed slowly and commented, it's not my favorite, but it has lots of protein. Sean chuckled, thinking about eating habit. It seems that Don and Sylph are quite compatible. As everyone finished their meals and began to leave, Henry whispered to Damien, it seems strange this boy is so kind. He carries himself like that noble brat you met on a wagon. Damien agreed, he does kind of remind me of Nolan. Looking at Sean, who was still smiling and talking, Damien thought, that probably just means he's got a wealthy background. Even if he's a noble, that doesn't mean he's automatically also a dick. Henry urged, you need to start practicing your magic. If you knew more, we could rip open that boy's mind and take a peek. Seriously, why haven't you started yet? Damien frowned and replied sincerely, I'm not learning anything that evil. And I haven't started because I don't know how to. Henry snapped, then asked me, you idiot, I've forgotten more about magic than your entire little school has ever known. Damien scowled and snapped his fork, frustrated with Henry. Then you should have said something. Unlike you, I can't read minds, Henry retorted quickly. But I can read minds. Remember, Damien grumbled, you know what I meant. Sean finished eating first and put down his fork. Well, I've got a theory class I need to get to. He stood up and said goodbye to everyone. It's been a pleasure making your acquaintances. Good luck. As he turned to leave, he added, the first year is a bit of a whirlwind. Try your best. Everyone waved goodbye and Damien thanks again for the meal. Damien and Sylph also stood up to say goodbye to Don and head to their room. We should probably get going as well, Damien said. Don replied coldly, you're telling me like I care. Which confused Damien. He stammered, what, but Don winked and gave a playful smile, saying, kidding. Damien was shocked with that attitude. The scene shifted to the dormitory area, with birds flying around the cliffs. On their way back to their room, they ran into Beth. Damien worried, crap, are we late? Beth approached them and asked, I see you decided to explore. Was your room not to your liking? Damien replied evasively, and Beth's expression turned sour. Well, it's got some things I think we can improve. Sylph was more direct. It's awful. Where are we supposed to train? The bathroom, huh? Beth immediately retorted, of course not. Beth continued, there are a multiple of different places to train on campus. And, like I said, you're welcome to make any modifications to your room you'd like. If you don't have a place to train, build one. If that's too hard for you, you don't belong at a mage college. Damien, feeling a bit intimidated, asked, so, any reason you're waiting at the base of the mountain? Beth replied, waiting for your friends. I'm checking to see how long it takes you all to head down. Did you two leave immediately after I did? Damien answered, a few minutes after. We went to the mess hall. Beth shuddered, yikes, I hope you had money. Both Damien and Sylph looked embarrassed and chuckled nervously. Damien thought to himself, is the food really that bad? It feels like more students are scared of it than the dean. Just then, Henry appeared, dressed like a chef, carrying a plate of burnt food and said, only one way to find out. Damien asked another question, so what's the plan? Do we just wait here for the next hour? Beth replied, no, they should be down soon. There's only so much you can do in those rooms on the first day. As the rest of the group arrived, Beth greeted them. Ah, here they are now. Mark spoke first. I see you two didn't wait around. When did you leave? Damien replied, a little over an hour ago. The Gray siblings looked displeased. Nolan asked, an hour, and Rena added, too good to invite us. Damien was unsure how to respond and thought to himself, would they have wanted to come? Beth intervened. Right, we're a bit early. Then she guided everyone. But there's no harm in that. Come along, we're going to the arena. A portal appeared. Damien groaned. Not another portal. One by one, everyone stepped through the portal, seemingly unfazed. Damien, however, was worried about another unpleasant teleportation experience. He thought, maybe getting food wasn't the best idea. As he stepped through, he braced himself. Surprisingly, he felt fine. He breathed a sigh of relief. Beth explained, this was a shorter teleport, so it isn't as bad as the longer ones. You'll get used to both. And now, Damien was then stunned by the sight before him. A vast, open field with birds soaring through the sky. The wind blew through his hair, and he couldn't help but exclaim in awe. Beth explained, this is the Colosseum. There are all sorts of training devices and tools to use on the ground floor. Just keep in mind that the school uses this arena for any official matches or tournaments. So you can't use it during one. Nolan, uncomfortable with the strong wind, shielded his face and asked, is there a reason you're showing us this now? Beth replied, of course there is. We're going to meet your professor. Then everyone walked behind her. Right after that, she turned to the others and said emotionlessly, follow me. Beth's next action shocked Damien. She jumped off a high platform. Henry muttered, I'd do the same thing if I were stuck being your tour guide. However, Beth landed gracefully, as if guided by a gentle breeze. The others were stunned. Beth turned to them and challenged, just jump. There are runes to slow your fall. Mark, excited, immediately followed. Haha, this is awesome. The others quickly followed suit. Nolan exclaimed, I'm not going to be the last. Rena hurried after him. Not fair. Nolan, wait for me. Damien thought, I feel like there's a parable to be made of this. One by one, they jumped, slowed by the magic, and landed safely. Sylph asked, is this area really big enough for everyone to train at once? Beth replied calmly, there are several dozen training facilities. This one is largely for tournaments. Damien noticed another group of people entering through the portal. As they arrived, they jumped down gracefully. Beth greeted them. Hello, Terrence. On time as always. Terrence, a red-haired man with a large scar on his face, replied, I don't see any professor here. That means I'm on time. Beth retorted, keep telling yourself that. Is a third group coming? Terrence answered, no, just our 2 flocks of lost little lambs. The professor specifically requested to only have 2 groups. He didn't want to deal with more. Beth's face turned pale, and she exclaimed, wait, you can't mean, they have dread. Beth's face turned pale and she exclaimed, wait, you can't mean, they have dread. Terrence waved his hand dismissively and replied with a smile, no, it's not dread. He doesn't waste time on first years. It's some new professor. Beth was even more puzzled and he's making demands. Who is he? Terrence replied, honestly no clue. Haven't met him and I don't plan to. Then he turned to the students he was guiding and said goodbye. Well, that's my time. Have fun. Kids, do what the professor tells you. Today is just an introduction, so it shouldn't be too rough. Beth, annoyed by Terrence's attitude, snapped, dramatic asshole. But he's right. The professor should be here any minute. Enjoy yourselves. Then they both vanished before anyone could say or ask anything. Damien wondered, their wristbands must have some form of portal on them. Do ours do that? Rena interjected. They don't. These are low-quality trash that do nothing but show some basic information. Mark asked, how do you know? Nolan proudly replied, we have far nicer ones in the Grey Mansion. All the servants are loaned one. They let you teleport to a designated location. Henry suddenly reminded Damien. Boy, follow the girl's gaze. There's someone over there. While Damien was still puzzled, Sylph looked terrified and stared at a certain spot. Damien was startled and widened his eyes. He asked, seeing a man, is that our professor? He doesn't look much like one. The man had an unpleasant expression. His mouth was set in a grim line. He greeted them in an unfriendly tone. Good day. I'm your professor for this year. I despise titles, so refer to me as Delph. Then, he walked towards them, continuing, I've been told by the other professors that young inquisitive minds like to ask questions. Unfortunately, I don't like answering them, so I've decided to tell you a little about myself, which will hopefully silence any problems before they arise. Stepping closer, he stood in front of them and said, I'm a new professor. I've been serving as a mage on the front lines for the past 20 years. Suddenly, a student raised their hand. He looked at the student with annoyance and asked, "What?" The student, frightened, stammered, I was wondering what we're going to learn this year." Delph frowned and replied sarcastically, "It depends if you stay in my class or not." Nolan was puzzled. "If we stay in your class, what does that mean? Can we choose our professor?" Delph replied with a sly smile, "No, but I can choose my students. And I have no interest in teaching anyone who can't meet my standards." Henry was annoyed by Delph's attitude and said to Damien, "He's cocky, but from what I can tell it's with good reason. Be careful around him." The others didn't react much to Delph's statement. Delph continued with an arrogant attitude. "This meeting is supposed to just be an introduction, not an official class. If you've got something better to do, feel free to leave." Mark smiled and asked rhetorically, "Leave?" Sylph was determined. "I've worked too hard to get here. I'm not going anywhere." Henry urged Damien, "Leave if you want. I can teach you 100 times more than this guy." Rena scoffed, and Nolan confidently said, "Hey, what kind of loser would leave?" However, some students left the group and walked away. Delph looked at the two students who left and said, "HMPH, two of you." Then he smiled and said, "Congratulations. All of you that stayed are officially part of my class. The two that just left are kicked out." Henry laughed. "What a hard ass. He's on a power trip." While Damien was too shocked to say anything. When Damien saw Henry's reaction, he commented, "Have I mentioned how weird it is that you speak like a teenager?" Henry quickly blamed Damien. "Your fault, not mine." Then, he warned Damien, "Trust me, you'll prefer me over the true it who heralds the end of all light. Now, stop talking to yourself and listen to your teacher." While Damien was deep in thought, a female voice broke the tense atmosphere. Excuse me." Delph turned and asked, "Do you have something to say?" The girl with long hair replied, "Yes, Professor." She was hesitant though she said it. "I don't think it's fair to remove them from our class when you said this first teaching session was optional." After that statement, everyone was silent. Delph asked again, "I see. Does anyone else share your opinion?" The girl looked at the others, as if asking if they agreed. Nolan pretended not to notice. Looking away, Henry tried to stop Damien from doing anything. "Don't even think about it. We need to be on his good side. Don't you?" But Damien was already walking forward. Henry cursed, "Idiot." But Damien ignored him and continued. Under Nolan's mocking smile, Delph looked at Damien with a frown. His eyebrows furrowed deeper. "You agree with your classmate? Or did you happen to need to use the bathroom at an inopportune time?" Damien replied boldly with a determined look. "I agree with her." The girl looked at him with gratitude and a small smile. Then, another person stepped forward. It was Sylph. She stood beside Damien and said loudly, "Me too." Facing the three students, Delph exclaimed with interest, "Bold." Anyone else? There was silence. No one else dared to speak. Delph smiled slyly and said, "Good, that's more than I expected. You three, what are your names?" They introduced themselves one by one. Damien Vale. Sylph. No last name. Loretta Herder. Delph repeated their names. Damien, Sylph, and Loretta. "Very well. Your request is granted. They will not be removed." Damien was stunned, asking, "What?" Delph explained, "Your friends will remain under my tutelage. For now, but I would like to know why you all stepped forward." Loretta replied nervously, It wasn't fair to remove them like that. If it happened to them, it could happen to me." Damien agreed, "If you don't tell us the rules, you can't blame us for not following them." Sylph was more direct. "I stepped forward because you were testing us. I don't particularly care if they remain in the class or not." Delph seemed satisfied and nodded. Then, he looked at everyone else and said, "All three of you are correct. This was a test, although your friends weren't in on it by any means. However, I will tell you this. If you fail to attend my training, you will not be prepared to pass my tests. Be aware that skipping any lessons will result in your eventual removal from my class." His expression turned serious. "One last thing. Upon my arrival in the arena, there were 4 students who spotted me." He raised 4 fingers and said, "I would like to speak with only those 4. The rest of you are dismissed. This is not a test." Henry bragged to Damien, "That's why you listened to me." But Damien was unimpressed and replied, "You just told me not to step forward." Everyone except the 4 students left. Delph asked the remaining 4, "So, you 4 managed to spot me. How many of you have experience with your magic?" Except for Damien, the other 3 raised their hands, which made him feel a bit awkward. Delph found it interesting. "Damien, you haven't used magic at all. How did you spot me?" Damien replied shyly, pointing at Sylph. I looked in the same direction as her. Sylph was speechless. Delph showed understanding. That would do it. I suppose there is something to be said for being observant. However, I won't be able to include you in this next assignment. Then, he smiled slyly and made a strange request. As for the rest of you, attack me. And without hesitation, he cast a spell. Then Delph immediately assumed a defensive stance. Preparing for the attack, he looked quite eager for the fight, even going so far as to challenge them. If any of you can draw a single drop of blood from me, I'll buy you lunch for the rest of the semester. And he didn't forget to add a punishment, his face turning slightly sinister. However, if you lose, he pointed at the four of them, you do exactly as I say until the end of this year. Henry bit his nails, excitedly telling Damien, watch closely. You can learn a lot from watching those stronger than you. Mark was quite excited by the offer of a free lunch and immediately took action. Swinging his sword, his eyes turned icy cold. I'll go first. Mark plunged his sword deep into the ground. Casting his spell, the ground cracked, and a ring of light appeared around him. In the next instant, he leapt towards Delph, his sword aimed directly at the man. Mark didn't hesitate to thrust his sword towards Delph, as if to strike him directly. But Delph easily proved himself to be a veteran, smirking and dodging Mark's attack effortlessly. He even scoffed. Predictable. Before Mark could react, Delph kneed him in the stomach, a blow that felt like a divine punishment. Mark was sent flying backwards, creating a loud explosion. However, he was still conscious, his hand trembling. Through the smoke from the explosion, he struggled to sit up, panting, the ground beneath him forming a large crater. Delph watched him with the same smile, lecturing him. Magic requires concentration to keep it active. Improve your defenses, or they will fail when you need them most. Mark quickly regained his composure. It seemed that after that blow, he was even more excited about the fight. He advanced and swung at Delph's chest again, but Delph casually dodged the attack. Immediately, Mark retreated to gain momentum. He swung another powerful blow. Mark was faster this time, and Delph looked more serious as he faced the attack. In a flash, Mark appeared behind Delph and struck a vicious blow to his hip. But Delph not only dodged it, he used his overwhelming speed to appear behind Mark and kicked him hard in the back of the head. After that kick, Mark was completely knocked out. Delph glanced at the unconscious boy and sneered. So, the match was over, he shouted. Next, and the boy in the blue shirt exclaimed, that was fast. He stepped forward and prepared to attack, his face serious and confident, saying, I won't go down as easily as him. Then he exhaled a white cloud from his mouth. In an instant, he was close to Delph, forcing Delph to exclaim, you're quick. But Delph had no intention of going easy on him. Delph was still faster and managed to grab the boy's arm, not forgetting to add, but not quick enough. But then he realized something was wrong with the boy's body. The white smoke was more than just magic. Immediately, he jumped back, said, that almost hurt. No blood, though. Just how hot is your body? The boy replied calmly, very hot, Professor. I've never measured it, but I have runes in my clothes to resist the heat. At this point, Delph's hand was also smoking. Delph clicked his tongue, we'll be measuring that later. Then Delph's expression towards the student changed, becoming more serious, and in the blink of an eye, while the boy was still staring at Delph, Delph punched him right in the chest, ending the match even faster than he had with Mark. The boy was now lying flat on the ground. Delph turned to say, you're up, girl, but Sylph had vanished. Damien was completely surprised. She's gone. Delph immediately sensed a killing intent approaching him and became alert. He turned and looked in the direction of the threat. Above him, a dark purple magical aura descended upon him, but he was able to dispel the attack. He seemed quite pleased. He was about to compliment her, but only managed to say, not bad, you. Another wave of pressure appeared, stronger than the last, and attacked him. Damien watched from the sidelines, his heart pounding. Sylph can teleport too. Henry, with his chin resting on his hand, replied to Damien, no, that's not teleportation. She's just camouflaged and fast. Fast for a mortal, at least. Delph seemed to be having more trouble dodging Sylph's attacks than the previous two students. And he clearly enjoyed the challenge. He complimented Sylph but somehow sounded sarcastically. Impressive. However, I can't tell if you're hiding your power, or it's just pitifully low. His eyes turned red, and he gave a dangerously wicked smile, saying, found you. In the next instant, he swung his arm behind him. He was able to grab Sylph's arm. But as soon as she was revealed, her other hand was holding a blade, which she swung towards him. Delph was startled and cursed under his breath. The next second, there was a loud explosion, and the light and shockwave from the explosion were immense. Everything nearby shattered. Dust and smoke filled the arena. After the smoke cleared, Sylph was lying unconscious on the ground, and Delph was still standing, one hand on his head. Damien was completely out of it, trembling with fear and confusion. He stammered, "What was that?" Delph sighed, "Magic. I didn't think I'd be using against a student. Your friend likes to go for killing blows." The blue-shirted boy and Mark, who had now regained consciousness, asked, "Is she okay?" Delph replied, "She'll be fine." Sylph was completely unconscious. Delph continued, "She didn't cut me, but I think the dean would have my throat if I didn't apologize somehow. I suppose I owe her something." Then he turned to Damien and asked, "Is she your roommate?" Damien replied, "She is. How did you know?" Delph explained, "You said you followed her gaze, so it was a safe guess. Take her back to your rooms. I'll take the other two to a healer. But she just needs some rest. She should wake in an hour or two, but she'll feel weak for a bit." After saying that, he went to the other two students and led them away. Damien and Sylph were left alone. He approached Sylph to help her, wondering, what in the seven planes was that? Henry didn't respond. Not hearing Henry's reply, he called out his name again, and Henry finally spoke. "I have no idea what he did. I've never seen that magic before." Damien guessed the meaning from that. Henry said, "That's interesting, I suppose." Henry disagreed and explained further. "You don't understand. I've seen every form of magic that humans have. I've been watching you for millennia. How could something be this foreign to me?" Damien replied, "We can worry about that later. It's not like Professor Delph is going anywhere." Meanwhile, he was checking how Sylph was. Henry snapped angrily, "Did you not hear me? New magic. To me, how are you not comprehending this?" Damien was speechless. He silently helped Sylph to her feet, struggling quite a bit. They hadn't gone far when Damien was out of breath. Henry scoffed and complained, "You need to start exercising more. This girl is half your size and you're struggling this much." Damien, sweating profusely, managed to retort, "I think I preferred it when you were terrified of Delph's magic." Henry corrected him and warned him, "Not terrified, shocked, and don't speak out loud. You're getting weird looks. You couldn't even begin to comprehend how unbelievable it is to learn something new after thousands of years of stagnation." While Damien focused on carrying Sylph, Henry continued to ponder, "And yet, the more I think about it, the more familiar his magic feels. How strange." Damien finally managed to get Sylph to her room after much difficulty. His face covered in sweat. He tried to pull Sylph to the side of the bed, and the moment he could put Sylph down, it felt like a lifetime of burdens had been lifted off his shoulders. Seeing Damien panting, Henry complained again, "You could have just taken the portals." He folded his arms and lectured Damien, "But you obviously needed the exercise." Damien didn't bother to reply, just sighed and shed his thick outer layer of clothing. He was too tired and decided to rest. Henry, who still hadn't finished, said, "I'm going to take a look around the world. Check out what we're dealing with. I'll be back before you wake up." Damien didn't pay attention to his words and simply replied, "Okay." When Henry left the room, Damien suddenly came to his senses. He suddenly remembered something and called out to him, "Wait, what?" Henry hadn't gone far and heard him. He turned back and reassured him, "Relax, I'm just going sightseeing. Besides, you can't even stop me. I'm just letting you know." With that, he disappeared, saying, "Enjoy your rest." This time he was really gone. And Damien could only sigh in exasperation, "I don't have the energy to worry about this right now." Then he looked at Sylph, who was still lying motionless. "I hope she's okay." Then he quickly lay back on his bed, thinking planes, "I'm exhausted," and he quickly fell asleep. Shortly after, he felt something strange and opened his eyes. Everything around him had completely changed. It was a very magical and strange space. He scratched his head and exclaimed, "What the hell?" It was a completely blurry space, and he was completely naked. He wondered, "Where am I?" And no matter how loudly he called out, all he heard was the echo of his own voice. Damien began to get annoyed and tried calling out again to see if anyone would respond. "Is anybody there? Where am I?" But then he quickly gave up. There was a strange feeling invading him, and being naked was a disadvantage. At that moment, a voice rang out, a familiar voice. "We are within your mind. A very small part of it. Anyway." He turned and saw Henry sitting on a small hill. Startled, he asked out loud Henry's name. He replied nonchalantly, "Of course it's me." "Why do you sound surprised?" But something else caught Damien's attention. "What is that?" There was a blinding purple light emitting from Henry's chest. He stared at it, and Henry embarrassedly waved his hand to make it disappear, scolding Damien. "It's rude to stare." Damien didn't care about what was on Henry anymore. He now angrily asked Henry, "Why am I naked?" Henry whistled, shrugged, and pretended to be innocent, replying, "It's your mind, not mine." Henry's response gave him an idea. Immediately, a complete set of clothes appeared on his body. Damien was delighted, looking at his outfit and admiring himself. "Wow, this is cool." Henry sat with his chin resting on his hand and made a sarcastic remark from afar. "You're literally just imagining things. It couldn't be more uninteresting." Then he drew Damien's attention. "Focus, please, this is serious." Damien also sat down, looking serious, and asked, "Right. What's going on? Why are we here?" "Wait, you ran off last night. What did you do?" Henry sighed. "Last night is why I pulled you here." Damien looked at Henry with concern. "What did you do wrong? Just tell me already." Henry was annoyed by that attitude and replied, "I didn't do anything." Then he got straight to the point. "I detected 5 of my brethren in the world." Damien jumped when he heard that. "What? There's more of you? That's really bad." And Henry continued to provide more information. "Luckily, they're bound, just like me. I don't know how or why, but they aren't free yet." Damien was surprised by Henry's reaction. "You don't sound particularly happy about this. Shouldn't you want more eldritch creatures here?" Henry immediately disagreed. "Of course not. I just found out there's magic I don't know. I want to experience that before the world goes boom." Damien was uncomfortable with Henry's statement. "I'm not going to empathize with something that wants to end the world." Henry explained, "Listen, boy, we need to work together on this. Are you comprehending the magnitude of the problem?" He explained why he cared so much about this matter. "The other void beings cannot escape. We need to destroy their hosts before they can get free." Damien immediately expressed his distrust of Henry, frowning. "Wait, how do I know you're telling the truth? I'm not killing random people with nothing but your word to go on." Henry grabbed Damien's shoulders and shouted, trying to explain the seriousness of the situation. "They could end the world before I learn all the new magic." But Damien remained unconvinced, shaking Henry's hands off. With a cold face, he said, "You've lied to me one too many times. Henry, I know this is serious, but I can't just take you at face value." Henry was slightly startled and just looked at Damien. Damien made his position clear. "If you want my trust, earn it, and you can start by telling me more about this." Henry was desperate and replied, "I know little beyond that they exist. I sensed their powers, and they were as restrained as I am. So they aren't breaking out anytime soon. It's hard to say. Probably not, but who knows how they've arrived on the mortal plane. I doubt they've got contracts similar to the one we made." Damien finally started to take the matter more seriously. "In that case, the world is over and there is nothing we can do about it. If you sensed the void beings, could you tell how far away they were?" Henry stroked his chin, thinking and replying, "One was quite close, no more than 100 leagues. The rest were further than that." Damien immediately saw the key point. "And they didn't sense you?" Henry didn't think so. He replied, doubtful. "It's much easier to watch than notice you're being watched. But if we were face to face with their host, we would recognize each other." Damien wondered, would I be able to recognize them? But in response to his enthusiastic question, Henry sarcastically replied, "When they burn you alive or stab you in the back." Yes. Both were now very serious about the matter. Damien continued to question Henry to ensure he wasn't being lied to. "Okay, then, assuming I believe you, we have the beginning of a plan. We can't seek them out yet, since they'll just kill me. And we can't exactly tell someone, as then they'll wonder how I know about your void friends." Henry folded his arms and expressed his dislike. "They are not my friends." Damien was still very suspicious, frowning as Henry continued, "My point still stands. Our only option is to get strong as fast as we can." Waking up from his subconscious, Damien thought gloomily, "Another worry to add to my plate." Then he decided not to sleep anymore, sat up and stretched. Henry appeared beside him and poked him, ordering, "You're finally awake. I want to look around campus." Damien was still sleepy. He grumbled, about to tell Henry to go off on his own. Though, he changed his mind and said, "Actually, don't do that. Last night was more than enough." Henry reminded him, "I recommend we avoid speaking of last night out loud." He bared his sharp, ugly teeth and continued, "Your room is not the sanctum you believe it to be. And who knows how many eyes are watching us. Damien realized that, and suddenly felt like he was being watched by hundreds of eyes. Henry still urged him on. Go about your training, but remember what lies at stake. Damien was still unsure of Henry. I'm still going to need more proof. But for now, that's about what I was planning to do anyway. Henry was excited, rubbing his hands together, smiling mischievously with his eyes blinking. Whatever lets you sleep at night. Also, you're talking aloud again. Then he got up and said, I'm just going to take a quick shower. Suddenly, he realized something was missing in the room. He stopped, looking at Sylphs. The bed was now empty. Then he asked Henry, where's Sylph?